Anyway, thanks for staying with us. This is Newsfile. It's on Joy 99.7 FM. It's also live on the Joy News channel here. It's live across our many social and media platforms as well, on Facebook, on YouTube, Twitter, everywhere else. And remember that Newsfile is always brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go, Star Assurance, your solid partner, Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa, Robert and Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years, Duraplus, how you get your water matters. Remember, where Duraplus goes, water flows. St. Thomas Eye Hospital, providing excellence in eye care. Haptel, everything you. My Way Insurance, dial *165# on the MTN to join. Magdan Aviation, your dependable private aviation request solved. My guests still with me. We're going to talk about the budget now, the most consequential budget of our life, also because of the time we're in. If you speak to those who have lived longer than most of us, they say they compare the current times. The only comparable time is possibly 83 thereabout. If there are even some who say now is even worse than then. So a budget such as this, on the brink of an IMF bailout deal, whether we even get it or not and when we get it, is still a bit of uncertainty around that. It's such crucial. It gives you an indication of what is to come. And some say we haven't even had the full detail when it comes to the austerity measures yet. So, big deal. John Kumar is the Deputy Finance Minister. MPA Jusu and Deputy Minister for Finance, Alex Segbefia, NDC Director of International Relations, former Minister of Health, Dr. Tue Champon, Political Risk Analyst and Economist, Professor Godfrey Bokwin, Professor of Finance and Economics, University of Ghana. You watched some of the highlights if you missed it during the week. And so I'm going to quickly go to round, and all I want is all of you to bullet for me what your highlights were in the budget, and then we'll come and break them down with some specifics. Dr. Tue Champon, so quick bullet for me. What were your highlights from the 2023 budget?
Thank you very much. In a sense, the government talks about some austerity, but in my view, this is actually not an austerity budget. It's at the central government level, it's very, very much expansionary in terms of scale and scope, where we're seeking to spend as much as 51% more money than we did compared to 2022, from 137 to 205 billion. But at the same time, we want to raise about 49% more revenue. However, it is an austerity budget for many of the citizens, in the sense that some taxes are likely to go up, and that's already going to add to an already very difficult situation. There are some measures that the government announces on trying to raise more revenue and cut expenditure, etc. But some of them, I think, they cannot be implemented. So a number of the measures about, vehicles and things like that, I just think it's just mere sloganeering.
Okay. Professor Bokwin, your quick highlights?
Thank you very much. Yeah, as we had said, fiscal consolidation taking root, governments coming to the reality on the ground, fiscal consolidation predicated on revenue enhancement, right? Some expenditure rationalization. Yes, my good friend spoke about expansionary. Yeah, but the point is, it's expansion to the extent that it's going to interest payment, not that it's really growth enhancing, right? So, and that is just to mirror the extent of the challenge on the ground. But Evans, you put it rightly. We have not seen, and the budget has not communicated the full scale of the austerity to come out of this, because the minister spoke about our debt sustainability analysis, that is pointing to debt unsustainability. Now, to solve that, the fiscal adjustment will play its role. So if you see from this budget, you see that fiscal adjustment is responding minimally, largely because of the challenge. Because if per our own estimate, the Ghana is trending in excess of 30% above the policy dependency thresholds. So if you want to bring the debt to GDP, either you look at it in present value terms or nominal terms to below the policy dependency threshold, the minimum primary balance, positive primary balance that you need to record to do that should not be less than 8% in the next 4 years. But the fiscal adjustment alone is doing far less than that. What that tells you, which the budget has not communicated fully, is that there is the need for debt treatment, debt restructuring, call it debt swap, debt exchange, debt rescheduling, debt restructuring, haircut. They are all from one family word: realized investor losses. For the ordinary person to understand, haircut. So the full extent of what Ghana needs to do to come out of this, part of that has been communicated in the budget. The other part would have to take the form of debt operation. Or, okay, if you expand that, the swap, exchange, whatever. So the full reality is not yet known, right? So there's still a lot more adjustment that we have to do. But I also felt a bit disappointed because when it comes to the expenditure cuts that the minister talked about, in fact, some of them are too small to have a place in the national budget. Because if you quantify the savings from there, no hampers, no this, it's so infinitesimal in the scheme of things, okay, to put such a premium on that. We are looking for, and these are not reforms, these are not growth enhancing cuts, right? So we are looking at a government that is bold enough to reduce the size of ministers. And the budget also failed to demonstrate necessary productivity enhancing reforms and governance reforms that needs to be pursued along an IMF supported program. Maybe I'll end it here and then we'll go into the specifics.
Well, so I want to do that now, and I'll come back to you all. I want to break it down into bits. We'll start with the revenue measures, because this budget, where we are right now, we will have to raise more money and cut expenditure. Those are the two key things we need to do to stay alive. So we'll look at the revenue measures, and then we'll come and look at the cutting measures, and then we'll look at the IMF program, the debt restructuring, debt swap, debt exchange, and what that will mean for everybody. But let's start with the studio, Alex. I want to do first the bread and butter, because you can talk about all the numbers you want. If the ordinary man on the street doesn't feel anything from this in their pocket, forget it. So let's start with bread and butter. First bread and butter issue is VAT going up by 2.5%. Second bread and butter issue is e-levy. And I'm sure in your head you're saying, we told you so. Bringing it back down. Because I remember very well when there were negotiations in Parliament and minorities said, in fact, they came to a consensus at the point that said you reduce it to 1%, I think it's 0.5. And that became a haggle. So those two bread and butter issues, VAT up 2.5, necessary evil?
I'm not an expert in this area. All I can tell you is that the impact of a 2.5% VAT rise has the ability to kill some of the gooses that are laying the eggs. It might collapse businesses, because on whatever bill, when you look at our import bills that we have and shops and etc., whatever, this 2.5% goes directly to the consumer on the street. It has no differential between rich and poor. And that is an issue for me as to, while we are in this austerity period, you also have to be looking as to how you can help those at the lower end of the scale, the poorest of our society.
They're increasing LEAP numbers, for example.
But they've removed the 100 CD threshold on e-levy. And that is bad. I don't know why they did that. They should just have left it. Because to send a little 50 CDs, a little 70 CDs, a little 90 CDs, 100 CDs, people still do that a lot. And the reason they gave for putting that in place in the first place was to help the poor. So why have you removed it? We didn't want e-levy in the first place. We've now started, and you've seen it, the figures didn't work out. So you are now coming down to a position where we'll do the 1% to get people who are already using it to try and come back onto it. Because people now found their own ways and means of sending money without going through e-levy. But why are you hitting the poor again? That I don't understand that bit of it.
So you said that the reduction in the...
You know, the 100
Doesn't
Ghana
do
cedis
much.
threshold, which was to help the poor when they are sending Momo out. And we have to send to certain people, send me 100 Ghana, you send me 50 Ghana, you send 20 Ghana, you send. It didn't cost anything. Now that has been removed based on the, so now you pay e-levy on everything. No.
But they've taken 0.5% off.
Why? We told them from day one, it was look, they've lost more money by doing it in the first place. It would have been easier to find a way to go with hard negotiations with the telcos to give you some more money from there rather than what they did with the e-levy. But we've crossed that bridge. We are now across. So now you're trying to now woo people back onto e-levy. Fine, so you reduce it. But don't touch the poorest of the poor. Leave them. Let them have that 100 Ghana cedi threshold. So when he has to send 100 cedi, which is not what it used to be because of exchange rate and the price inflation, at least let them send the 100 Ghana cedis easy. I don't know, that's the aspect of it that I have a real difficulty with. For me, that is the one thing on the budget that I don't agree with at all. Then, of course, the 2.5%. As for increased revenue, we have to find a way to increase revenue. But isn't 2.5% too high? He may tell us why. But I think that if you're not careful, businesses are already collapsing. And that is where you get your revenue from. So if the VAT now becomes the last straw, that breaks the camel's back of these businesses, then it will become counterproductive. And we are now going to lose a lot more from existing businesses and the expected revenue generation. Don't forget, one of the things that has been mentioned by one of our experts is that, look, in all this, you've already indicated that you want to increase your expenditure. That is partially because of exchange rate. Because if you know that you were buying $100 at 6 at a certain point, and now you are buying it at 12, it more or less has doubled, if not gone higher. So that will have to deal with some of that. But you have to look at what is in that increase in expenditure. That is so paramount. And that is where what is missing from the budget, as he has indicated, in terms of debt restructuring, but more importantly, in terms of cutting expenditure on government projects.
Okay, I mean, so that will come to, because there's a whole chapter that talks about it. I will come to that. But John, let's start with this revenue measures that you announced.
Yeah.
Why 2.5% in the VAT?
Yes, so I will get to, okay, so the 2.5.
Yeah, 2.5. Or you want to deal with the
to just comment
on the yeah, no, feel free to do it. Do so.
Points made.
Do so.
I want to agree with Dr. Teo and Professor Popkin on their analysis so far of the budget. When in the face of the budget, it doesn't look like this an austere budget. But of course, Professor Popkin made the point that it looks like that because you have to deal with the interest payments. And we have just announced in the budget about the debt exchange program. And we are now going to deal in detail because we have not engaged the bondholders and the investors. You couldn't have reflected any treatment in the budget. And so that is why we are seeing the current figures that we are seeing. But we believe that in the days coming, when the announcement is done and engagement is done, because we want to have an orderly and cordial arrangement as far as the debt treatment is concerned. So that's the reason why the budget may look like it's still high in figures, because there's further actions to be taken. The issue to do with the VAT. First of all, let me refer to the statement that Honorable Ken Ofori-Atta made, the finance minister, when he appeared before the Censure Committee. He said that there's something that every finance minister at this time of the hardship in everywhere should be saying to their citizens, that we are sorry. These are very difficult times, and we acknowledge the pain of the Ghanaian and everybody, what we are all going through. And so this to put in context that it is not with pleasure that we will begin to introduce taxes in the difficult time. But unfortunately, where we are, we must begin to have a burden-sharing attitude at every level, including even the poor, so that we can all own the country in better times. So that was the essence of we having to introduce 2.5% on VAT. First of all, VAT is a refundable tax. And so when you compare to introducing any new tax, maybe on petroleum or any other thing, your better option in these most difficult times is to do a VAT. Then the yield levy. Yield levy was at 1.5%. Of course, people will say, why are we flip-flopping on the rates of yield levy? But it is also an indication of a listening government.
Really?
Oh, yes. Because sometimes you are not sure.
But they told you.
Yes, you told us.
Professor Bokpeng told you
Yes.
that the rate was too high.
Yes.
And you said, no.
No, we listened. We reduced it from 1.75 to 1.5. So it's not like we don't listen. And there were a number of suggestions that came that went into exemptions. So we listened. It's not true that we don't listen. And then having implemented it up to this period, yield levy, we all saw the commotion around its regulatory processes in terms of making the law and the impact it had on its implementation. Of course, I can say with the data I have seen that there's about 60% growth in terms of Momo usage and its impact even on the revenues that we are generating under yield levy. We still have challenges because not all the stakeholders channel the transactions through the common platform. So we are not getting the amount. So a lot of compliance issues which we are dealing with. But in order to also assess the impact of yield levy and people's further suggestion to get it down, government responded that, okay, let's reduce it to 1% to encourage more people to be on the yield levy, and then also to see increases in volumes on the yield levy.
But you've taken away the
threshold. Yes, the suggestion was to take away the threshold and reduce the rate so that the impact, if it was to protect the poor, because the rate was high, it could affect them. But if the rate was 1% on, say, 50 cedis, that would be very minimal in terms of impact on the poor. So all these considerations have been done, and the data now proves that when we do it this way, we will be responding to the public expectations of reduction in yield levy, and at the same time meeting the revenue targets that we are setting for ourselves.
Another revenue measure was the property
Yes,
rate.
the property rate.
That you're behind time on.
Yes.
Because in the last year's budget, you said it would start in January.
Yes.
It didn't start. You
Yes.
brought it back. In fact, if you go even way back, the last IMF program, it was part
That's
of the
always
thing.
been there.
Yeah, it was part of the things. We
Yeah.
still haven't come around to do it.
In order to do an effective property taxation in our country, certain things needed to be done. And I'm happy to announce that they are done now. First of all, Ghana Statistical Service has done the housing census. Now we know about 8.5 million houses are in Ghana now. Then we needed technology to help in one, identification, and two, the evaluation of the cost of these houses, to be able to determine, because if you send me a bill to pay on my property and you have not done evaluation of it, how did you bill me? So we needed to do these background works to be able to have.
So you have to determine the value of the house,
the value
property,
of the house,
before
the value
you
of
can.
the property before you
I
can.
thought you were going to impose a flat.
No, it's not flat.
Okay.
But the billing and evaluation processes has a formula in the law. Unfortunately, at the moment, the way it is, the land on which the land sits is not captured in the law. So let's say a house.
It's only the
is
building.
legal,
It's only the building, the structure.
The structure.
But not the land.
So as we move forward, these changes may have to happen, amendments in the law to reflect the real cost of the houses, including the land as well. But for now, we have been able to overcome all these challenges. Government has now signed agreement through the Ministry of Local Government with all the 261 MMDAs across the country, like MMDCs, the district municipals and municipalities across the country. And GRA will be working in partnership with the private sector with the technology to be able to do the implementations. When these resources come, the benefit of this property tax is that 70% of the revenues will go to the districts in terms of their revenue mobilization. And it is not coming to the center for further disbursement. The technology is built such that as soon as if I pay 1,000 cedis on my property, immediately it gets to the payment center, it's split into two. 700 will go to the particular district that I have paid from, and 300 cedis will come to the center, where GRA and government will split the 30%. So this eventually, we strongly believe, will reflect in the levels of revenues that are being generated at the district level, and we are gradually going to see proper and effective implementation from January of this year.
Sorry, January of 2023.
January of 2023, yes.
So from January 2023, we'll be paying that?
Yes.
Okay, I mean,
that's the
so we should hold it, because last time you said that in January.
No, because the works were not done. A lot of things needed to be done.
Add, no, my problem with our country, not your government, our country, is lack of education. Till you sat here and explained this, I'm sure, Evans, you knew nothing about it.
No.
I know nothing about it. At this point in time, information should be going out as to the rateable values of all the areas.
Because January is
around the corner.
It's around the corner, yeah. Right.
Information should be going out. Why, as a country, we don't do this? We hold on to everything and think, oh, we'll just pass it and it just... Excuse me.
Pardon.
The information must go out so that you can even begin to know how to plan towards that bill that is going to come. So that people can understand why, if you are doing land, maybe it's a little bit more expensive in Nima because you're opposite Kanda, and not seeing Nima as just Nima as it was. Because now the land value has changed, because you're actually in very high prime land area, as you are in Nima. It's high prime land. But it is just because of the historical concept that across the road, all of a sudden you're in Kanda and that is very high, and here might have to be a little bit lower. All these things is education. Yeah. It happens in Kumasi, in Takrady, everybody. So when is this education going to come out? So that should be factored in immediately. Sorry,
you want to respond to that quickly before I get to
No, very well, good observation made, and I think we'll take it on.
Okay, Theo Champong, your comments on the revenue measures in the budget. I mean, you can start with the revelations just made on the property rate tax that will start in January.
Yes, but let's maybe take it a little bit back further. When I looked at it, there are about 7 revenue measures, and there are sub-things, right, underneath each and every one of them. From e-levy to VAT to income tax reforms, there's stuff about excise taxes, the benchmark policy, national fiscal stabilization levy, which is now being turned into a growth and sustainability levy. And then there's some stuff about selling 5G spectrum and rent tax compliance and things, right, related to that. And from the government's own assessment, they claim in the budget that this is going to generate about 1.35% of GDP in extra revenue. So if you take the current 592 billion economy and you work out that ratio, it means that they should be generating roughly about 8 billion Ghana cedis of extra revenues coming into the government treasury. But then the question is, how realistic, right, are these assessments, starting with even the e-levy, and then we can talk about the VAT and the property rate and some of them. If you take the e-levy, many of us said from the get-go that 1.5 was not realistic. And even the 1% that is currently proposed, in my view, is still a problematic, figure. Because you need to look at their own numbers. From the first quarter to the third quarter of this year, on e-levy, in Appendix 2A of the budget, they have collected 319 million Ghana cedis. And the projection is to do 611 million by the end of the year. But we're already 4 quarters in, and you've already done just about half of what you want. And then magically, this number in the 2022 budget jumps to 2.2 billion, right, Ghana cedis. And the assumption is that if you reduce the rate, then people are much more likely to pay. But I struggle to see how reducing it down to 1% whilst you are removing that 100 million limit would ensure that you're actually going to get that 2.2 billion figure. So I doubt that those targets would be met. You can look at the same thing with even the COVID levy in the budget, the same one, Appendix 2A, Appendix 3 of the budget. COVID levy in 2022 in the revised budget was 1.1 billion. In 2023, the projection now is that we'll be doing 2.5 billion of this COVID levy. So what has changed? Not much has changed. And you see that in some of the other handles that the government is putting or making in the revenue projections. And then my worry then is if come 2023, we are not able to meet these numbers, then necessarily you have to do further cuts or you have to go right and borrow. But when you look at the fiscal numbers from the 23 budget, the government says that they're not going to borrow from the market externally and even domestically. And as most of the borrowing, $64 billion worth of the borrowing is going to come from the multilateral partners as a result of the IMF program. But if all of these tax handles don't deliver the goods, and number two, you don't have your multilateral partners even supporting you with the extra 64 billion worth of borrowing, then basically we're going to be in a very, very, very difficult situation come 2023. Hence why I think a lot of the numbers should have been fairly conservative rather than looking rather bullish and creating an impression that these things are attainable, when in fact, when you look at the historical projections, many a time we have underperformed on our revenue and rather spend more on the expenditure side of things. And I don't see really how we're able to square up on those numbers in that regard. Quickly on the property taxes, I think it's a good thing. We all agree across the board. And it's good that the minister is giving further details around how that would be implemented. But importantly for me, it will ensure that a number of the MMDAs can at least raise money and implement and run projects at the sub-national level in a way. We'll see what the details are. But in the budget, you take the revenue measures, the details, unfortunately for me, really, they're lacking because we haven't done as much of the costing that is required. And even in instances where we've done them, you see, in my view, a clear over-projection of the numbers. And if things don't pan out as we expect to, and many a times that's what happens, in 2023, things will be extremely difficult for us.
Professor Bokwing, so the revenue measures have just been aligned, and thanks, Dr. Tujapo, for breaking it down, because I'd forgotten the income, income tax one. I need clarity on that, whether they're going to increase that tax for all of us or not. But Prof, what's your take on the revenue measures? You agree that in terms of costing it properly, it's not been done as effectively as it should, but also its ultimate impact, right, on the ordinary Ghanaian in this difficult time?
Okay, thank you very much. I think Dr. Teo has said a lot of the things that I don't know whether maybe we're looking at the same data. So thank you very much. You made my submission a bit simple. Now, coming from how government was bullish about 2022 and where exactly they suffered policy credibility and why the market punished them, comes to what Dr. Teo said, that the assumptions underlining the projections must be able to hold against challenges consistently throughout the implementation period. And that is where the challenge is. If you put the totality of the revenue enhancement measures and then the expenditure side, it leads to a strong austerity or strong fiscal consolidation with some level of front loading. What that tells you is that in the immediate to the short term, sort of, something will have to give up. And what will give up in such instance is growth. And government got that right. So if you check 2023, Ghana's growth projection is the lowest, even in comparison to our regional peers, let alone to talk about our structural peers, our aspirational peers, or superstar benchmarks. Okay. Cote d'Ivoire is going to go far ahead, better than Ghana. Even Nigeria's growth projection for 2023 is higher than that of Ghana. That of Benin is higher than that of Ghana. Togo is higher than that of Ghana. Now, what that tells you is the price we have to pay for the fiscal consolidation that we are implementing. Now, let's come to the specifics. Evans, where I am disappointed is where we have this perchance of just increasing rates anytime we think that we have to raise more revenue. Let me tell you something. You know, government does not exist solely to just impose taxes. Taxation in itself can be packaged as an investment in certain sectors or as dividend upfront in certain sectors. So that is why, as Dr. Teo said, we disagree strongly with the introduction of e-levy. And I'm happy the Deputy Minister said they have listened. Please, I want you to go from here and reduce the e-levy to 0.5. This is what will constitute listening. Honorable, I'm pleading. You are my very good friend. My position has been that we should delete it. A good compromise, you know, because you're also looking at putting the tax rate at a level where you are able to manage the trade-off of revenue generation and growth trade-off. That every country is putting measures in place to maximize their participation from the digital economy. Okay, so and look, Evans, Ghana is not an island. So when you are doing your tax fiscal policy, you do so bearing in mind your neighbors, especially within the African Continental Free Trade Area, because we are talking about one big market. So you must be mindful of what others are doing as they prepare for a better future than you are doing. So that is why the e-levy, if they want to listen, you know, there is a way you trick the market to your side. Broadly, if the finance ministry will check, they will see a certain consistency about comment on e-levy, which tends to trend around 0.5, not 1%. Whilst you have the extreme of delete. So sometimes you do certain things to win confidence. So assuming the government had reduced it to 0.5, you will see a lot of economists who will say, yes, at this rate, it can bring a lot of people what? You need that. And that is what constitutes listening, right? So, Honorable Deputy Minister, please, from here, go and do that. It's not too late. Reduce it to 0.5. There are studies that have demonstrated that if you reduce it to 0.5, what that will do in terms of roping in. Okay, do that. Now, Evans, let's come to VAT. Ghana's VAT rate until 2023 budget actually was not 12.5%. Ghana's VAT rate on the effective analysis of the incidence of the VAT on the consumer was more than 12.5%. What the government did was to treat Get Fund levy and the other levies as straight levies, which does not give the option of recovery. What that does is to immediately contribute to the high productive cost base of doing business. Bear in mind, your private sector that must bear the brunt of this and households, they are competing within a certain broader market now called AFCFTA. The average VAT for Africa was 16%, end of 2021. And because we decided to treat Get Fund levy and the others as straight levies, it created a false impression, and actually that's a deception, that our VAT was the lowest at 12.5%. So if you look at it from that perspective, then the Ministry of Finance is right in saying at 12%, whilst the average for Africa is 16%, we can increase it by 2.5%. But actually, what you have done is to take the effective VAT rate to above 20%. Honorable, we don't need to do any study on this. We are here to provide you with the data. Studies exist that when your VAT rate reaches 18%, any additional increment is counterproductive. At this rate, if you add the straight levies, because to the final consumer, there's nothing like straight levy, they are paying. And to the extent that for the private sector, they then get the opportunity of recovery of those straight levies is counterproductive. Now, this is what the effect will be. It then goes to undermine the private sector competitiveness, which is then the anchor of your economic transformation and inclusive productivity growth. You must look at all of this within that context, right? So if you look at it effectively, and for us, we're actually adding the straight levies because it's just an accounting treatment to say this and therefore it's 12.5. It's not on the average. So look at now, Evans, if you pick VAT and you relate that to our regional peers and our structural peers or our aspirational peers, our VAT is collecting less than 8 desirable amounts. And it's simply because of exemptions that are granted at the port and the others. Okay, so what that tells you is that we are doing slightly above 40%, whilst others are doing close to 70%. That gap is inefficiency. You close that gap through compliance and administrative issues at the port and the various levels, not through increasing the rates. Okay, so we are rather focusing more on rate adjustment, which is burdensome, inequality enhancing, and counterproductive, rather than efficiency. Okay, and that is pathetic.
Okay.
Now, if you
very
put all
briefly,
this
because
together,
I want to come to the studio again and then can move on to the next point, which is the cuts.
Yes, just to summarize, COVID did not only affect the government; it affected households, private sector, and the rest of them. You check across the globe, compared to our regional peers, structural peers. Evans, I'm looking at it so that you look at it that we have one big labor market in Africa now because of the AFCFTA.
Yeah, that's true.
So whatever you do here, you must do it bearing in mind the competition. It's just like the World Cup. Every country is preparing their team to go and win. So whilst you are preparing, you must also keep an eye on your opponent. Now, since COVID came, we have introduced COVID levy. We have introduced sanitation levy. If you look at the layer of taxes and the adjustment, simply put, we are creating a financially repressed society that can only explode one day. I'm not like saying something bad for this country. We are inhibiting the growth drivers of the economy. And I think Honorable Alastair Fiat talked about private sector, some businesses that are already collapsing. What is likely to happen somewhere along the line, you may find, is that when you want to increase more revenue rather than through efficiency and you are going to raise at rate adjustment, people may choose non-compliance as a way to survive.
Yeah.
Okay, and offset that burden. Okay, and that is what the e-levy suffered from in terms of the projections.
Yeah, Prof,
maybe I'll end it here.
Stay with me. Quickly, John Kuma, address some of the issues you raised quickly and then move to the cuts.
Yes, I will say that I've noted the concerns that Professor Bobkin has put across. There's been a very strong debate about the rate of e-levy, whether 0.5 or 1%. We took into consideration all the scenarios, and for the moment, I agreed on 1%. I've listened to the arguments. Of course, all those arguments were made, but maybe when eventually he has the full data, he may understand why, at the moment, government had to agree on 1%. Of course, the other issues of concern on the impact of all these difficult economic measures, we can only agree with him. And that is why even the growth rate has been brought down to 2.7% as far as 2023 is concerned. It's a difficult period, And
But you agree that the effective VAT rate is not 12, but it's close to 18
yes, if
now.
you add a NHIL and the GET fund, yes, it comes to that. But I said the 2.5 we are adding to the 12.5 is a refundable tax. So that has less impact on businesses. And so we believe it to cushion businesses to a large extent. And then the issue of compliance. Of course, government is doing a lot in that area. We're talking about raised revenue, assurance and compliance measures to make sure that we expand the tax base. And some of the exemptions too, they are sometimes very necessary to keep the economy running, because there are some businesses, essentials like, let's say, food, health, medicines, some essential commodities that it will be difficult for you to add VAT. So even though he's talking about some gap being as a result of the exemptions, some of the exemptions you cannot do much about, because when you tackle them, then you're opening
And very quickly clarify the income tax handle measure that was also announced in the budget. What was it? What is it? Are you increasing the tax on incomes?
No, I didn't see any incremental tax.
There was announcement on the income tax. I wanted to clarify that, because this is the end. The income tax regime will undergo reforms. So among others, review the upper limits for vehicle benefits and introduce an additional income tax bracket of 35%.
Okay.
What does that mean?
I haven't really looked at this
Okay.
tax option. So I'm unable
Because
to
we need some clarity, because that one, income tax there,
I haven't looked at it.
Okay, let's go to the cuts then, because I think that's, let's go to the cuts. You have to balance as you raise revenue, what you cut is important. Alex, I'll start with you, because you've raised, in fact, you started even the Sagalame matter by saying you have to cut expenditure, and then you invest those savings in other areas. So they announced a raft of measures, some of them old ones, they've added a few new ones to it. All MMDAs, SOEs are directed to reduce fuel allocations to political appointees and heads by 50%. And ban on the use of V8, V6, and its equivalent, except for cross-country level. Limited budgetary allocation for the purchase of vehicles. It says, for the avoidance of doubt, purchase of new vehicles shall be restricted to locally assembled vehicles. Only essential official foreign travel across government, including SOEs, shall be allowed. As far as possible, meetings and workshops shall be done within the official government or government facilities. Government-sponsored external training and staff development activities at the Office of the President, SOEs, ministries are put on hold. Reduction of expenditure on appointments, including salary freezes. This is important. Salary freezes, together with suspension of certain allowances like housing, utilities, and clothing. A freeze on new tax waivers for foreign companies and review of tax exemptions for free zones. A hiring freeze for civil and public servants. And because you were in the health minister once, I know the doctors and nurses and those in the health sector will be alarmed at this, because the challenges there. So whatever, you need to replace what happened. But there's a hiring freeze for civil and public servants. And no new government agency shall be established. There shall be no hampers for 2022. Alex, you're not expecting it from John. There shall be no bring your diaries, notepads, calendars, and other promotional merchandise. And all non-critical projects must be suspended for 2023 financial year. And the key question, that's the key one.
Yes.
All non-critical projects must be suspended for 2023 financial year. Your comment?
I'll start with the last.
Okay.
What is non-critical? They don't define it, because I've had this debate elsewhere, and all their flagship projects are critical. As far as the 1D, 1F, free SHS, one village, one dam, name it. All those, including the 111 hospitals, they are all critical projects. So as far as government is concerned, there is no cut on those. I'm surmising from that statement. It's important that they tell us what are the non-critical ones, because I'm not clear in my mind.
And so did you have a finite list
Exactly.
of these are for 2023, these are critical, these are non-critical, and then we can all
And
do it.
everybody knows where we are. And that omission is actually glaring from the budget, because we need to know what government is actually going to be cutting. What is government doing about the amount of 3 billion in the last budget? We don't know what this budget said for government expenditure at Flagstaff House. What is their budget?
The Office of Government Machinery.
Yes. What is the budget for the government machinery this time around? He may be able to give us that information, because the last time it was 3 billion and nobody could understand why it was that high. So it's 1.5 this time. We thank God for small messes. But please check and double check that. But these are the type of things that should 1.3. Yeah. So
From 3 billion to 1.3.
Yes.
Office of Government Machinery for 2023. Okay.
So they've come back where they should have been all along. So the 3 billion was a big problem for us in last year's budget. So I'm not saying it's the best, but at least it's a step in the right direction. That I'll give them. But there's a lot of expenditure. The real expenditure is in their flagship projects. And yes, we are not saying get rid of them. But so, for example, we still need 111 hospitals. Yes. But who says we need it all in the next 2 years or the next, which is the remaining time of this government? What are they doing about it? If they took 60% of the money they want to spend, would they be able to get 20 to 30% of those hospitals up and running, as opposed to trying to build all at the same time? Why don't they just prioritize, look at the demography of hospitals on the ground and patients, and say, okay, even if we are going to go ahead, as far as we are concerned, we are building only 10 hospitals for now. It's on the drawing board. Any government that comes knows that we need to be building this number of hospitals. But for now, we've scrapped the 111. We are looking at these 10. And make sure that by 2024, whatever little revenue you have, you've put up those 10. Then we know that we are dealing with the specific issues and the specific points in the expenditure chain. I'm also concerned about the statements or the credibility of government. And at the focal point of the credibility of government is the president. You see, when a point was made by our experts, we are in an environment which deals with Ghana not being an island. And we are in it not just by mouth and by things happening, we are in it because we are in the market. We are very exposed in the Eurobond market. We are very exposed in our own markets. So your utterances are paramount. I was just talking about the former finance minister in the UK making a statement which he thought was politically wise for his political party. The markets reacted. He lost his job and the prime minister lost a job. You now have a new prime minister. The currency exchange rate, which dropped almost to 1-to-1, has now gone back where it belongs, 1 to 1.2. So when you are in that type of an environment, which Ghana is entering or is in, you have to be careful with your utterances. When you say you do a project and you put a timeline on it and you don't meet it, you lose a mark. You go and say another timeline, you don't meet it, you lose a mark. It's not 2 months. How many weeks? No haircuts. No haircuts. From the president speaking to us, it gave the impression by the next day, when Kojo Nkrumah started trying to explain what the president said, he was now explaining what the president said. All that he did was that the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. And it's at the top end. Wrong perception. And that perception feeds into credibility. So you now even have a credibility factor with the budget. Because people are going to say, okay, you are saying this. Your expenditure is this high. You're going to spend this. Are you sure? Well, are your cuts for real? Or is it just...
You don't believe the cuts?
Are this, or is it just cosmetic? I mean, this is the problem we have now in the country. We've lost credibility with the government at the top. And it's a huge problem because of the market we are in. So they really have to come out with more specifics. It is what is missing from the budget that then coming down to the domestic, the me and you on the ground. What actually irks you? There's no real delving, and maybe there. If it's there, forgive me. But what is worrying us is the petrol price. Exactly how are we going to...
That was conspicuously missing.
Yeah, I mean, what are we going...
that was sent to go and forage and bring us affordable fuel.
Where are we going? Over the next 6 months, where are we going to be with petroleum prices? Or are we just praying that the Russian-Ukraine war and would disappear and things, or the world economy...
In fact, I must admit, it is the biggest omission from the budget.
Well,
because also it's the biggest challenge we're all facing right now.
There should have been something said on it. Yeah. It is important because that is driving everything else and hitting our inflation where it is at 40-something%.
Well, fuel was mentioned, 50% cut for government appointees.
But that, I mean, I'm not... Well,
I know what you mean, I know what you mean.
Which part of government appointee am I? So, for me, that omission is glaring. And people want to know about these things. So then it was mentioned, but it has to be in more detail. Internal borrowing from the Bank of Ghana, which I'm happy to say that when we left office, look, let me delve into small politics. If we were a government that was looking to win election, we could easily have borrowed from the Bank of Ghana 10 billion that election year and change the things that happened. 2016. We didn't even get to the 5%. We didn't borrow debt from the Bank of Ghana. That is the economy that they said was bad that we handed over. And now we are in billions owed internally. We are going for haircuts, which the president said we were not going to have. For bonds, for treasury bill, all manner of things. We are in a mess. Only that we are all trying. And Evans, we are all trying because it's not good for you and it's not good for me. Now we all have to try, tighten our belt and make sure that we get out of this mess.
Okay.
But I'm clear that the domestic borrowing weighs the petroleum, and just to mention, yes, the VAT is this thing. There's an aspect of it, it's refundable. I agree with you, but not to the consumer. When I go and buy, I pay VAT. Nobody refunds for me. Yeah. To the business, it's a useful thing. But the 2.5% is being also felt by the consumer. So we should look at it.
Let's stay with the cuts. Theo Champon, I listed the cuts. Are these cuts deep enough to balance the shortfalls that you can expect from the revenue measures we talked about?
Two quick responses just on the last point, and I'll speak to the cuts. On the VAT, Alex makes an important point about the refund system. And in fact, with the current VAT, the input tax credit system actually is not really working. So the way it's really working in reality on the ground at the moment, it's more like a direct sales tax rather than, an input-output system. And Prof makes the point really that it's going to add to the cost of business. So we need to look at the issues there. And I think the issue is really not to increase the rate, but to enforce the compliance. There's a World Bank study that shows that we have even an import tax gap of about 35%. So several leakages at places like the ports. And if we can fix that, we can raise more revenue without having to increase the VAT. One other point on the revenue measures on the stabilization levy, they introduced 3 tiers, which has 5% profit on tax all the way to 1% profit on tax, profit before tax for a number of entities. And in the category C entities, extractives companies, so oil and gas mining companies, are meant to be paying 1% profit before tax. I think it's going to be difficult to implement that one, largely because many of these companies have stabilization provisions in their contracts, and you cannot just retroactively go and want to increase the tax take. So I see a lot of the companies in the extractive sector strongly fighting for this, and it might even end up, in the courts. But ultimately, it all adds to the issue of, the budget credibility issues that we're talking about here. And specifically on the expenditure measures, a lot of them are outlined. But in my view, they are not really costed or the detailed breakdown provided. So in other words, they are just, mere statements of intent. And whether that can be attained is another thing altogether. I could count about 8 or 9 of these expenditure measures. I think it's about 13 or so. But the two big ones that I think can be done for now really is like the freeze on the tax waivers for the foreign companies. And then also there's this bit about the tax exemptions not being given to any entity in 2023. That's a straightforward one to implement. But then some of the other ones about banning the use of V8 and essential foreign travel and things like government-sponsored external training and staff development initiatives at the office of the president being put on hold. I struggle to see how that will be done, largely because we've had similar measures instituted in the past. If you recall, even in the mid-year budget, we had similar things being instituted. But the impact is that when you look at the numbers, the expenditure keeps rising. And you see that in the various line items of the ministries, even with the government number plates. We had a policy initiative several years ago to get all the government cars giving or having GV number plates on them. So what happened? So my point is that we keep introducing these policies, but we are very weak on enforcement and compliance. And then if your revenues also don't deliver, then we're basically more or less in a very catchy situation where we are not really able to then, have a credibility in terms of the budget, and then the markets end up punishing us because basically they don't trust the numbers we put out and the plan or the strategy to meet them. I'm sure we'll come back to the issues of the debt and the
I'll come back to the debt
things like that.
right after that. But let me get Prof's quick take on the cuts. Prof, quickly, are these cuts deep enough?
No, they are not. The market has already incorporated many of those cuts. Okay, so to announce them in the 2023 really doesn't constitute economic news. And Dr. Tew talked about it, that many of these were announced, in fact, in the enhanced measures at the beginning of this year. Even that together with all the measures, it could not assure investors and stakeholders of a fiscal sustainability plan. Evans, what we need is we are not doing it. We need revolution in the cost structure and the cost governance drivers in terms of number of ministries and ministers, and also in terms of the state-owned enterprises. Sometimes we have created many of them that are actually performing the same function, and some that have been created in the last couple of years that on the ground are actually not doing anything, but they are receiving budgetary allocation, largely consumption-based. Okay, so if you want to grow, whilst you are looking at austerity and all of that, you are looking at packaging this in the form of reform, which will be more sustainable and also predictable, rather than 50% coupon here, as Dr. Tew said, on the average, very difficult to monitor. It may be observed more in breach than in compliance and all of that. So that, and these things can easily be restored. Look, it can easily be restored. But Evans, the problem Ghana has is that if you look at the way we are operationalizing our democracy, it's so expensive on the public purse. Across state-owned enterprises, central government expensively arrange social programs. And oftentimes, we are unable to demonstrate the impact. When you have lost credibility and you do policy prescription, and the rest of it, you want to demonstrate the impact.
So you wanted to see details like how much you expected to save, and then costing each item.
Precisely. And then also we want to be able to enter the zone of recording a fiscal deficit, but it has to be a debt-reducing fiscal deficit.
Yeah.
Right? And all of that. So, but we haven't done that. So now the conclusion from that cut is that it tells you that the government is actually not leading by example in terms of the burden sharing. Because if you put all those cuts, sometimes those non-discretionary cuts, some of those things actually, because of the knock-on effect, it may actually end up affecting ordinary people.
You make
meanwhile,
you make an important.
the
But quickly wrap up, because make a point. I want to quickly come to John on before I take a break.
Yes. Meanwhile, what we need and what I was looking forward to in the 2023 budget was for government to initiate certain governance reforms that lean more towards efficiency and lean government, which we can work with for the next couple of decades. And I'll give you an example. Côte d'Ivoire, in April 2022, decided to reduce the number of ministers from 41 to 32. Evans, I could just tell you some of the things that Côte d'Ivoire did to reduce the effect of the rising international oil price. The authorities in Côte d'Ivoire introduced differentiated fuel price measures. They decided that gasoline prices were going to be increased by just a certain amount, but diesel was kept unchanged because of the effect of that on transportation services, overall inflation and productivity. But guess what? On food price inflation and to preserve food security for the most vulnerable, price caps and export permits for essential food staples and a custom duty exemption on wheat were introduced for a period of 3 months.
I see.
It's not like
it's possible.
Do something extraordinary.
Yeah.
But you see, you are looking at, you have to demonstrate something, right? It may have some fiscal implication, but the trade-off and all of that. But that kind of leadership has been lacking in our part.
So it's possible. Let me come to John. Let me come to John. John, so he makes a point there, which is that, so the expenditure measures, 2.5%, I can direct, it's quantifiable, I can feel it in my pocket, you can measure it. The removal of the flat rate on e-levy, I can measure it in my pocket. But when it came to cutting, you talk about burden sharing, a lot of it is not quantified at all. It's pretty vague and out there. Yeah. Why that difference? Yes. In the way you're treating me, my pocket, and the way you're treating yours.
Good. I think I'll come to the specifics of the cuttings, and I think we could have done a better job by putting figures to all these line items of cuttings. But there's a reality with the Ghana economy in terms of its rigidity when it comes to expenditures. If you look at this budget, the entire expenditure that we are talking about for 2023 is about 190 billion. Out of that, 52 billion is going into interest payments. And these are rigid payments that by law you cannot do much about. Compensation to workers in the country is about 44 billion. And if you add statutory payments, which are also prescribed by law, it's another 35 billion. You realize that there's very little space in terms of what major cuttings you can do again. Leonard Sagbefia spoke about these flagship programs and why we are not doing something about. The entire flagship program cost is about 9 billion cedis, including free SHS and all the ones you can talk about. Okay. Of course, we talked about LEAP, that in these difficult circumstances, even though we are seeking to cut expenditures, we are increasing LEAP payments and the school feeding programs to provide safety nets for the very poor in our societies. So yes, those things are there. And then in terms of specifics, if you compare 2023 budget to 2022 budget, we didn't provide Appendix 10C in this budget.
Which
means that project loans that were contracted to do new projects in 2022 was about $2 billion in 2022. That has been scrapped.
So what projects are we talking about here?
You want to build new hospitals, new schools, new roads. I'm talking about the ECAs, the export credit facilities that we contract from the EXIM banks and all kinds of projects. I don't have the 2022 here. I could have taken you through the number of borrowings we did under Appendix 10C to finance new projects in our country. We scrapped that in this budget.
So saving us what?
About $2 billion on that alone, not contracting to spend in 2020.
Is that what you meant by non-critical project?
It could be part, because clearly we need them, but they may not be so critical at the moment in terms of we want to build new hospitals, we want to expand one or two things. Of course, those projects are important because they expand the economy, but for now we can hold on to that. So that alone is about $2 billion, which we have saved in expenditures in this budget. Then we talked about the petrol.
Yeah, which is key.
Yeah, which was.
How did the finance minister miss that in the budget?
Well, if you have been following, the Office of Vice President has announced the strategy for bringing down the cost of
Gold for oil.
Gold for oil, and that is going to be the key strategy.
Is that flowing from the president's announcement?
Yes.
The affordable
yes,
oil. Securing.
Yes.
So that's how you're achieving
That's
that.
how we are looking at it. Because if you look at the forward auctions and the spot auctions for the forex that we use to buy the fuel, even though the forex exchange today, as we speak, may be 13 or 14 cities, they may be using 19 cities for the dollar because of the forward auctions if you engage the BDCs. So in order to bring down these forex variations that tend to inflate the cost of petrol in the country, His Excellency, the Vice President Office, is leading that charge for the gold for oil system of bringing in crude and refined oil and to get it at a very reduced cost.
So instead of giving them paying in dollars, you give them gold.
Yes.
So we're going to. So this is bilateral.
Bilateral.
So country to country.
Yes, and firm to firm.
Okay.
Those that will be willing to come on board.
But private guys, they accept the gold.
Well, you want your oil, or you? Why not? Gold is equally Ghana gold.
I mean, but we don't have gold.
We do. We are acquiring gold. So there's a.
So is it the one you're buying?
Yes. So
From yes.
the Minister for
you introduced
Lands.
it last year.
Exactly, and the Lands Minister has come out with an arrangement where.
So you're buying. So Goldfields and others,
yes,
for example,
sell 20% of their gold
to the BOG.
to BOG, and then the small scale will
Yes.
sell to government and PMMC, and then all the other.
So you take that when you accumulate,
Yes.
and then use that to buy
Exchange
oil for the market.
Yes.
Okay.
Is
For
it that
us-
it's not finalized properly yet? That's why it's not in the budget, or you are working? It's work in progress.
So it is part. It's part of everything we are doing for 2023. So if it's not clearly stated in the expenditure measures, it's maybe because it's still a
To be fair,
discussion in progress.
the vice president who chairs it issued a statement.
Yes, it's a
saying that.
discussion in progress.
Okay. So when is that beginning, though? I mean, I
The
guess
focus is
when.
2023, January.
So January we'll
Yes.
start seeing the benefits of that.
Yes,
So
that's our
you're
hope.
saying that the cost of fuel at the pumps
begin to come
should come down because you're using gold to purchase
Exactly.
it. Okay. So that is when you send people to Saudi Arabia, was it Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi and co? It was to
part of the
negotiate
arrangement.
that arrangement,
It's part of
and they've agreed to accept our gold to give us oil.
Gold is as liquid as any currency you can find in the world, and there's no difficulty with that arrangement. We believe it will work out, and so we are doing something in terms of the cost of petrol as the president directed. It's also captured in it. So basically, these are some of the expenditure measures. And if you look at the MMDA's allocations in this budget, there's been a lot of cuttings, one of which was referred to about the Office of Government Machinery, which has been reduced
From 3 billion to 1.3.
and several other allocations have been cut. We were not able to reflect other things because of certain arrangements that have to take place first before you can reflect them in the budget. But on the whole, government is very much committed to making sure that, and even though some of these expenditure cuts may look trivial or small in terms of the estimates by people, it means a lot to people who are observing how governance is run. Why should government appointees be driving V8s in towns, just from your house to office, just costing extra fuel and everything? So now His Excellency the President has directed in this budget, unless maybe you are going countryside or you're going for out of town.
Yeah. So if this weekend some minister is driving his V8 to a funeral, who is monitoring that?
Well, there will be monitoring. The Office of Chief of Staff is supposed to monitor.
That sounds very impossible.
Yeah, well, it may be impossible, but at
The man is
least
that
the fact that
parked
it's
his
been
car at
directed,
is eating some fufu. Who's gonna see his car and say, panic? I mean, Alex, you've been a minister. You think this is something that is realistically enforceable?
You see, it's more in terms of what is the definition of government business.
Yeah.
So if I had to go to a funeral in Kumasi, which is a funeral of a party person, for example,
Can I argue it?
Am I not doing government business?
Yeah.
I'll go with my V8.
Yeah, I mean,
So it had to be a little bit more specific in terms of if you are in a city, we did it in a different way. We had a pool of vehicles at the presidency. And if you had to leave town, you came and made a request for it. That's not the ministries. I'm talking of those who were working in the presidency.
okay.
So we didn't give 4x4s to people at the presidency. It was a big issue. Everybody got a salon. But there was a pool of 4x4s. And if you had to go town so you didn't have it to say, I'm just going.
Okay.
You had to come and request, and then they give it to you. You went your day.
Let him wrap up for me.
Another expenditure of government is the opening of or creation of new government institutions and agencies.
Which you've again suspended.
Yes, which we've suspended. And of course, there will be continuous cuts in the salaries and allowances of government appointees across, including the SOEs.
Okay.
So all these are interventions to show that government is leading by example.
I'm going to take a break. When I return, we'll wrap up with the debt conversation and what is going to happen in the context of the IMF conversation. That's a big one, really. It really will determine whether or not we get the IMF deal. And government, the finance minister mentioned that there's going to be a debt exchange. I know that's been a controversy around that. What is debt exchange? You've heard at the beginning, Prof said debt exchange, whatever you call it, it still boils down to debt restructuring, which entails a haircut of a sort. We'll wrap up with that when we return from this.